I'm going to provide just kind of a brief overview of the state of charter schools in Texas. Again, all of this is coming straight from our report, which you can find by scanning the QR code on the screen. Or again, we'll put the link in the chat and in a follow-up email so you can see it in depth. But all of this information is from the public record. It is often not easily accessible or transparent to folks, but it is all publicly available data that we have been able to report on. So first, just a broad overview, charter schools by the numbers in the 2023-2024 school year. Charter schools enrolled around 420,000 students across Texas. That's about 8% of Texas students enrolled in a charter school. There were 186 charter operators operating 916 charter campuses. So what's the difference between an operator and a campus? The charter operator is the entity that holds the charter, the contract with the state in order to operate the charter school. A charter operator can operate one campus or they can operate many. And one of the concerns that we'll touch upon throughout this presentation is that once a charter operator has that contract with the state to open a charter school, if they want to expand and open a new campus, they just have to go to the Commissioner of Education, who's appointed by the governor, and file an expansion amendment, essentially. And the commissioner has essentially sole authority to approve that request and open a new campus without any public vote or really any local input from folks who will be affected by that decision. Charter schools are funded by the state, of course, and in 2023-24 received $4.4 billion in state funding. And the original promise of charter schools was that they would be able to be exempt from these regulations that public district schools have to follow, right? Because they promised that they would achieve better student results. When you look at the data, what we found is that that's actually not what's been happening. So if you look at the statewide STAR scores over the last 5 years, you can see consistently public school districts are outperforming charter schools. And charter schools across Texas also have a higher percentage of DNF rated campuses and districts. That promise has not been met. You can look at other metrics. Districts are leading in the percent of high school graduates, not just that district schools are graduating 95% of public school graduates across the state, but also that public school districts have a far higher four-year graduation rate, than charter schools do. And charter schools also have 3 times higher the rate of high school dropouts as our public school districts.
Wow.
Yes. And here's that teacher piece that I was talking about. Again, as you can see, charter schools have far higher rates of uncertified teachers, teachers with 5 or few years of teaching experience, and higher charter school teacher turnover, which means that students are not being able to develop the same level of consistent relationships with teachers. Teachers have less experience in a school system. All of these things, of course, again, an experienced and prepared teacher is the teacher that we would all want in front of our kids and our grandkids. And so to see charter schools have these really, high rates compared to our public schools is important to point out here. And we talk about, public schools being the foundation of our democracy, dating back to, our founding fathers, and really throughout US history, public schools have been seen as a mechanism to introduce students to the ideas of democracy, but also as kind of the local form of government where many parents, family members, students, teachers, and other community members for the first time get the opportunity to interact with a local government system and, become advocates and organizers because of their experience with public schools. And so it's especially concerning that charter schools are not democratic institutions. They are private organizations with board members who are self-selected, often with no term limits. Obviously, that's a big difference from our public school districts where we regularly have school board elections. If folks in a community are unhappy with the direction of a school district, they can elect a school board member, and they can also unelect that person if they feel that they're not meeting their standards for what they want their local school to look like. We don't have that kind of power and input into charter school decision making. Charter school board members often live in other cities. They can even live out of state sometimes, again, compared to a school board member who resides in our communities. They often are our neighbors, send their kids to the same schools that community members do. And so have that direct kind of, buy-in and knowledge about how a local school and community functions. Charter schools can often also outsource a lot of their key functions and staff to out-of-state organizations. This is concerning not just because we are, sending taxpayer dollars out of state to these out-of-state organizations, but also because, again, they're just further removed from the communities where these decisions are being made, and there's less ability for us to have input into those decisions. Voters also don't have any approval over charter school bonds. Private charter school boards can incur billions in bond debt without any local input. And where our public school districts have to accept all students and serve all students, charter schools often say that they will serve all students, but in reality, they can screen students out through policy and budget decisions that we'll discuss throughout the rest of this presentation. One thing, again, that's really important to point out with charter school boards being privately operated and self-selected, there is much less accountability and transparency into charter school boards, which leads to a less informed and less engaged public. And this is, Grandparents for Public Schools has been really amazing in helping us kind of look through charter school board documentation and minutes and videos to really kind of understand the way that they tend to operate. So thank you to those of you who have participated in that project. And what we found is that charter schools have almost zero parents and community members who attend board meetings. I'm sure many folks on this call have been to or at least seen a public district school board meeting. It's unimaginable to think about a district school board meeting where there was no community input or no community members in the room, but that happens regularly at charter school board meetings. That is partially can be because, again, they may be located not in the community. I live in Austin. If a board meeting is in Brownsville, there's no way I'm going to be able to get there, even if I have an issue that I want to talk about, right? So sometimes they're not even located in the community where the school is. But board meetings can also sometimes be held in really small spaces, like law offices that are not, you literally cannot have more people than the charter board in that space. There's no board book, no information on agenda items. This is one of Patti's favorite examples that I know she's going to talk more about. But one of the ways that this has real, harmful impact is that we'll often find vague agenda items that give no kind of indication of what is actually getting decided or voted on or where money is being spent. So Idea Public Schools, for example, a couple years ago, the board approved a lease of a private jet. Not something that we could ever imagine a public school voting to approve without intense community backlash, right? And there was once this was made public, but we were really lucky that someone happened to be watching that board meeting, because if you just read the agenda, the item where they discussed the lease of the jet, all it said was approval of BB&T Bank and Capital Investment. I don't know what that means. We would have no idea that that was about a jet lease without actually being in the room or watching the meeting. So those sort of vague agenda items give very little transparency into what's actually going on. And we've had a lot of issues with public information requests getting simple things like board minutes or audits or things that should be transparent to the public. And this isn't just, an ideal or the idea that democracy is essential to our public schools and that public education should be public and transparent. It has real impacts when our education system becomes privatized. And so I'm going to hand it over to Patti to talk about what some of those harmful impacts have been on our public school districts, but also on our students.
Thank you, Maggie. It's good to remember that report covers a lot of territory. I encourage you guys to pull it down and take a look at it. And also for your meetings, like Tracy, sometimes it's nice to have a hard copy. And we have a lot, so it might be kind of cool to get a stack when we see you soon. You're in and out of Boston so much. So you've got, 100 or something for meetings and stuff, because people can print it, but still, I'm kind of old school. I like to have it in my hands. I'm going to talk just about kind of what all this means and provide some anecdotes to you, and then we'll get into more things that you can do. And you all have done a lot. I mean, your members, as you probably know, testified a lot during session, and we're always, Tracy made many, many trips to Austin. Robert was involved. You've also testified at state board meetings, and then this project we're working on together will be very interesting. I've had this. There are a lot of things that we still need to do to understand charter school operations. Even I've been doing this about 12 or 13 years, but there's still areas that I kind of have a hunch, but I don't know. So one of them was to prove that, in fact, parents do not go to board meetings for charter schools. So I'm really eager to see what you guys have found. And Tracy, who's been on a school board, and many of you, as Maggie said, have been to school board meetings, but I know it's almost laughable to think that parents don't come to charter board meetings when you're on a school board. I mean, I'm one of the worst offenders. My board members, they know we take on school boards even when we love them, right? So, and you've been on the other end of that, Tracy. So I'm going to just talk through some of the sort of real world implications of this lack of democracy, public engagement, transparency. And some of you may know a lot of this, but hopefully it's a little new information. The first thing really is that it's terribly important. And I think in some ways it's the tail that wags the dog, because charter expansion is unlimited, even though there is a limit on the number of charter operators, which Maggie explained. So IDEA Public Schools is one operator. There is a limit, statutory limit of 305, and we only have 186 because every year we approve 3 or 4 new ones, maybe 5 or 6. But you also have charter schools that closed. 2 charter schools have closed this week, by the way. 2 charter operators have closed just this week for lack of enrollment, failure to provide services to special ed kids adequately on one of them, et cetera. So the real way, probably about 80%, I haven't updated that number, but between 70 and 80% of the charter expansion is through an amendment, which is a simple administrative application. It's about maybe, I don't know, 10 questions, something like that. Pretty easy to fill out. And once a charter gets approved and they meet some pretty simple TEA requirements, which the commissioner can waive and often does, then they can apply for an unlimited number of charter schools. So even though they may have said they're going to locate in Dallas and their first campus is in Dallas, after this period of time, and they have to, again, meet these simple criteria, they can apply to operate anywhere, Rio Grande Valley, El Paso, Austin, et cetera, and they do. And the big problem with that is that, as Maggie said, it is approved by one appointed official, which is the Commissioner of Education, who's very pro-charter. He approves about 70% of all applications for new campuses. There is no vote by any elected body. Districts are informed, but a lot of them don't know what to do with they call it a statement of impact, so they don't do anything. And they get kind of cynical about it because there is limited consideration by the commissioner on the actual impact on public schools. So since 2010, over 1,000 new charter campuses have been approved solely by an appointed official, and with no consideration of the impact on the district. And that is something that some of our state board members have continued to bring up to the commissioner. We have written letters, et cetera. We have, over the last 12 years, even though we, have not changed leadership of TEA or at the top level, i.e. the governor who appoints, we've done a lot of work in building a pretty good coalition. There are about 21, 22, most of the statewide education organizations are in a sort of an ad hoc coalition, and we do policy letters to the commissioner, to the state board. We organize We organized testimony to the state board, and there's been some real impact. And one of those is in really building an understanding that there is impact with unlimited charter school expansion. Next slide. And just to give you an example, again, no notice to the public. This is part of the whole problem with charter schools in terms of having engagement of the public in a democratic process. There's no notice to the public, no public meeting, no public vote, no vote by any elected body. So there's no accountability, no guarantee of quality that this campus will be quality, and no appeal process for the community for them to actually appeal to anybody in terms when the commissioner approves it. Next slide. So just to give you a really graphic example, Idea Public Schools, which is the largest charter network in the state, probably the largest in the country, it was approved for one campus in the Rio Grande Valley in the year 2000. It now has 136 campuses, and 135 of those have been approved through the amendment process with, again, no public meeting, no public vote, etc. So that gives you an idea of just the impact of this unlimited expansion. Next slide. And then I wanted to give you an idea of what that means to districts. So this is just a sample of some of the big urban districts. And about 3 or 4 years ago, we found that nobody knew what the actual revenue loss was to school districts from charter transfers. That number is publicly available, but kind of hidden on the TEA website. So we developed basically, we worked with school finance people and developed a calculation that's all based on TEA data. But we are able to determine what the estimated revenue loss is to districts from charter school transfers. So you can see here, just over 5 years, you can see, just to look at, I'll take Dallas ISD, which is second highest, but or I guess actually San Antonio ISD is. But just to look at Dallas, so just in one school year, 23-24, they lost 33,000 students to charters, which is 24%, 1 in 4 of, or basically 1/4 of all the students in their attendance zone, they lose to charter schools. And over 5 years, they've lost almost $1.7 billion. So it's a lot of money. And you look at those 5 urban districts over 5 years, there's a loss of $5 billion. So that has a huge impact on a district when you're losing. I don't have the annual amounts here, but I know in Austin, we're losing about 150, I live in Austin, about $150 million a year. And when you look at budget deficits, the budget deficit for districts pretty much tracks with what we're losing to charter schools. Next slide. So what happens, what's happening to districts is not only the loss of state funding, and I'm not going to get into the problems with our school finance bill that only gave us $55 per student when we needed additional dollars per student when we needed 1,300. That's a big problem. But we also know that even before this huge problem with state funding, we had a lot of campus closures. And partly that is due to the charter transfers and the loss of revenue. So you're seeing charter campuses closing across the state, cuts to student services, counselors, summer school, a lot of valued electives that are some of the reason. It can be arts and music because those aren't mandated. So a lot of the programs that keep kids engaged, extracurricular activities, are the ones that get cut because they're not mandated. And the same with staff. So that has a huge impact on just the value that parents see. And one big thing, and I probably need to add this to the slide, is that one of the big problems is that when districts don't talk about this, and then they have to close a campus or cut a program, they get blamed for it when it really is this systemic problem of charter schools. And that's why I tell people who say, well, I thought, this particular charter was one of the good charters. And there are some charters that, are not terrible academically. There are some that are terrible academically. But the problem with charters, and there are dedicated charter school teachers, and there are, really who have the interest of kids, but it's the charter school system that is set up to undermine school districts. And it does it for all the reasons that we're stating here. And that's really the important thing to understand. It is the system with unlimited, no consideration of impact. And that is what is really creating this, what I really believe is a crisis for our public school system. One of the reasons. I mean, certainly lack of funding is another. Next slide. And just to give you another impact, one of the other reason when people talk about quote, good charters is that charter schools they are set up systemically to have selective enrollment. School districts take all students. And some may argue that school districts may have a magnet. This is what charter schools argue. You exclude students too, because you have magnet schools that may have uh, criteria or requirements that are academic requirements, which is true. And the argument that's a red herring argument, because a student may not be selected for a magnet school or for a performing arts school, but they are not. They can go to their home campus and to other campuses in the district. They are not excluded from that school district, which is what charter schools do. And you really see this with special education students. So charter schools serve about a third fewer special education students. I'm going to talk about why that matters. We have, from the research that we've done in looking, again, all at public records from TEA, a third of charter schools have 0 special education teachers, even though they have special education students. And they spend 92% less on special education students that they do have, which means probably that they are serving students who have are less expensive to serve. And why does it matter? Why is this? There are a lot of reasons that matters. It means that special ed kids aren't as welcome at charter schools. They may be, if they are admitted, there are selective ways that we know anecdotally they are counseled out. But one of the big reasons is that it's an expense to serve special education students. We have a $2 billion gap between the public schools get an allotment from the state for special education students. It depends on the service they receive. So they get additional money from the state, but districts spend $2 billion more than what the state reimburses them for. So when you have fewer special education students, you can spend more of your general revenue money on everything else. But districts can have, I ought to put some of the examples on districts here, but I think Austin has an $80 million deficit or budget gap between what they receive from the state and what they spend on special ed students. So the fact that charter schools underserve special education students has both financial implications and also performance implications. So next slide. The other thing I've really, and this just gives you the numbers, you can see public school districts serve basically almost 13%, charter schools serve 9%. But where you really, really see the big difference is when you begin to compare a charter school to a nearby public school. And that's because you sometimes see these higher special education rates at low-income campuses. So I use Wheatley High School in Houston as an example, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So Wheatley High School has almost 20% special education students. Yes Prep, which is 1.1 mile away from it, has 8.5%. So they're basically serving students in the same neighborhood, the same geographic area, but you can see the difference, more than a 2-to-1 difference. Why does that matter? Wheatley is the campus in Houston that was 5 years low performing. It is the reason for the state takeover, the primary reason for the state takeover of the largest school district in Texas and one of the largest in the country. And you can see just from this number, and there's other data, but this is the most graphic. Wheatley never had a shot. When you're serving this higher percent of special education students, again, you've got financial and performance implications. The other thing that happened, I just mentioned, because it's going to fit in with almost my next slide, is that Wheatley made accountability. They were rated acceptable on and on. It's a very high needs campus. It has immigrants, lots of low income kids, lots of mobility, lots of attrition, et cetera. But they almost every other year, they met the state standard until Yes Prep opened. And this is again, all from state data. After Yes Prep opened, they never had an acceptable rating again until 2019, when they put a ton of resources into that campus. It was rated C. It was acceptable, and yet the commissioner disregarded that and went ahead and took over the entire state takeover. And that is a huge issue, which I'm going to talk about later. So next slide. And then you can also see, this is one of the things that makes me a little crazy. You'll see campuses like Basis talk about having one of the highest rated high schools in the country, which according to US News and World Report, which is true. But look at the students here. So first look at special education. You'll see that it's the Hobby Middle School, which this is this particular Basis campus, which is in the Dallas area, might add. It's one of the largest charter schools in Texas. Not close to IDEA, but still pretty large. You'll see that Basis is in orange. So if you look at special education, the charts on the left, they serve less than 2% of special ed kids. The two schools closest to them that are secondary, the high school serves 10.7% and the middle school serves 14.5%. So again, you have a charter school talking about being high performing when they are not serving students that represent the neighborhood where they live. And the same thing with economic disadvantage, which we all know that test scores correlate with poverty levels. I mean, you can almost just guarantee what test scores are going to be, what STAR scores are going to be by looking at the income level of that campus. So Basis is 7.6% economically disadvantaged, and then you can see Clark High School is 37.7%, and Hobby Middle School is 70%. So you really have to, when charter schools brag about having these, and some do have these high performance rates, you really have to look at student demographics. So next slide. And the other thing I've really begun to focus on is transportation, because less than 47% of charter schools spend zero on transportation. Districts don't, they provide transportation. So if you're a family that doesn't have a car, or your parents don't have jobs where they can, pick you up and drop you off and pick you up, then they can't get to a charter school. So that's a huge way that you have selective enrollment. Next slide. And also, charter schools spend significantly less on instruction in the classroom, about $512 less per student on instruction in the classroom. Next slide. And I just wanted to bring all those things together, because what we're seeing, and this is so important, I think we really are at this crisis point. So when you bring in unlimited charter expansion, revenue loss, selective enrollment, and then you have all these state policies, lack of state funding, A through F ratings, which shame campuses. Again, a D campus is almost always going to be a low income, high poverty, high kids of color campus. A ratings are generally, not always, but generally going to be higher income, very low percentages of kids of color. And then you have a whole state curriculum, which we're not going to get into today. So you have all these things going on, and the impact of it is state takeover, campus closures, loss of valued programs, and which then is lack of faith in public schools. Next slide. And this next slide is not mine. It comes from someone who has also kind of looked at this big picture, but Noam Chomsky, who's a very noted linguist, he really has looked at privatization. And so all the things I just said are really a pattern, which is you look at how do you privatize and how do you basically ensure that people lose faith in public education. You defund it, check. You make sure things don't work, check. People get angry at the district, not at the state, because they don't understand it because they're not aware, check. And then you hand it over to privatization. So that is the formula, and those are the things we're looking at. Next slide. I'm only going to let you see this because we're out of time, but just to kind of show you some of the things that happened. These are the administrative expenses. Charter schools, public school districts are in turquoise. They are very efficient. They serve less than 7% on central administration costs. The other ones are all charter schools, and you can see that they spend much more on central administration. So whenever people say public schools aren't efficient, it's absolutely not true. Next slide. I think this is the last one. I wanted you to just see how much money we send out of state. These are only four of the what we call charter management organizations. These are ones from Arizona, Virginia, and Florida, where we're spending, just in this case, this is over 5 years, over $50 million out of state for charter management to manage our in-state charter schools. Next slide. And I just want to touch on some of the scandals. This is all in the report. So these are kind of the fun pages. I have a mission in life to make sure no one ever forgets about the Idea jet that the board voted to lease a $15 million private jet. And their rationale was that the leadership of the charter, including the board members, were spending way too much time in the Houston airport. And the president of the board, who was a bank president, his bank had two private jets, so he really thought IDEA needed one as well. So there are some examples in the report that are interesting you should look at. And the important thing is that, again, parents aren't at board meetings. And I mean, again, Tracy can say if Capella ISD said, the board brought it up and said, we're buying a luxury condo in Dallas with granite countertops to store the records for our district. Board members would probably question the superintendent about that. But you see these examples of things: luxury boutique hotel, lease of a private jet, purchase of an equestrian center and horse ranch, $600,000 superintendent salary approved by the president of the board, who is her uncle, luxury box at the AT&T Arena, and most recently, an $870 million a year superintendent salary. All this without any public transparency until variety of ways, sometimes through hard research, sometimes through insider. People call me, people call Maggie, where we find these things out. Next slide. And again, this is the largest, this is an example, the largest bond that's ever been done for a charter school in Texas history, in US history, is at a Texas charter school, $400 million in debt, and no voter approval. It was approved by five individuals. So 5 of us on this call could have a charter school and commit, and all that is paid back with Texas taxpayer dollars. By the way, this particular charter school now has, it's been approved an additional $650 million bond. I have not gotten confirmed with the national group that that is the largest, but my bet is that it even surpasses the 400 million. Next slide. So I'm kind of done, but before we get into what you guys can do, I wanted to open up for just a little discussion to see what you all know about this or what you think about this. I'm thinking about some of the challenges and things we need to focus on in 2026. So I'd like to get your thoughts on it. And I'm going to run through them, and then just, any thoughts you have, let me know. And then we'll get into kind of, as we finish up, things that we really could use your help on. I'll preface that when I turn it back over to Maggie by saying, I think that the only way we are going to make change is through groups like yours and really galvanizing the community based on things that matter to people, which is their public schools, and finding issues that affect them locally. So we can talk about that.